So my talk's on the complete connection to body, and with that, I want to look at the connection to your body, but also how we fit into this greater ecosystem, because it's from my perspective that you can't really have a complete connection to body without having your connection to everything, because I don't believe that we are separate from any of that. So yeah, I've got a couple of sort of things that I just came up with after Susie and Brian asked me to do this, just like my end of practice day musings. And I'll be presenting these through the lens of osteopathy. And osteopathy is just a few principles that just say, how is everything connected and what can we do about it, pretty much. It's, the way I look at osteopathy is common sense for the body, which is quite similar to, I think, how regenerative farming looks at growing things. So if I had to pick one theme that I would like to focus on and come back to on each of these points is what I got taught when I started osteopathy is that we want to be focusing on health rather than focusing on disease, or ease rather than dis-ease. And it seems like it's a minor semantic, but it's a huge difference once we change our attention to what is our focus for making something better rather than what is our focus for fixing something. Because you instantly go from the problem to the solution without even really considering the problem. And it also, you can then look at systems and our body systems as greater than just solving the thing that was annoying me. So basically, from my belief system is the body wants to thrive just as the earth wants to thrive. So if we can focus on that, then we get to grow a little bit more. So my first example that I wanted to talk about are pellets, as in the roof of your mouth, airways, and joy as a product of that. So the evolution of our bodies over the last like however many thousand years has been pretty slow and progressive, and over the last 300-ish years it's had a pretty big shake-up, and I'd say even in the last 10 or 15 probably that again. So relatively to that slow change, we've had there's people who research things that have changed our bodies, and one of the things is our palates change shape over time. So it's got a lot more like this rather than this, because we have a lot more processed food. We don't have to chew as much, is the simple bit of it. And it starts really, really early. Like it starts from the way that palate is formed from breastfeeding. And then there's a knock-on effect through the foods that we eat. So I know I said I want to focus on ease rather than disease, but this first one I'm going to start with a problem and then we'll work out from there. So what we see from this heightened palate is we see a thinner jaw, and then what that happens is it closes up the airways, and that maxillary airway doesn't get to lift and expand. So from there, when you sleep and you're resting or throughout your whole day, your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight-flight nervous system, is upregulated all the time. And this is not, like, that system's not a bad guy. This is a very useful part of our nervous system. It's, if you want to get something done, that's the one you need. And it runs all the autonomic stuff. So all the things that you don't think about because it would be overwhelming, like your blood pressure or your respiratory rate or the repair of a little scratch, that like all that autonomic nervous system is running below conscious thought, which is very, very helpful. And formally we would go into sympathetic and then we'd drop back down, and you can kind of picture it like a seesaw for parasympathetic being rest, digest, repair, and sympathetic, and there's only a certain amount of allocation of energy that can go to that whole system, so it has to be shared. So we're essentially living more in this sympathetic system, and from that puts a lot of stress on our nervous system. So you go to bed to get some rest, and that doesn't really happen because you're getting these little micro wake-ups because your sympathetic nervous system is getting woken up from a shortage of oxygen to the brain, because that's a pretty big stress. from there, we get stuck in these states of anxiety or depression or various different mental illnesses that essentially a lot of it can be traced back to a inability for our nervous system to regulate itself. So the issue with focusing on this is, like, you would have all heard of cortisol. You get high cortisol levels, high stress levels. That then becomes, like, depression becomes a product. It becomes a product of our experiences, but it also becomes a marketable product, because you can make a whole industry now, because you've got ways to treat it, you've got ways to prevent it, you've got ways to become aware of it. And then it also feeds into a whole bunch of other industries where you get all these subsections, say in education or in HR, which covers every single industry. So my question then is, like, what's the inverse of that? So how do we focus on, like, if we just stick with this example of a palate and an airway, what is the way that we can make that good for us? So when you're in the womb, your body's sort of doing this flexion extension, and a lot of it comes from this muscle in the psoas. So our bodies are curling up and extending, and that's pumping fluid around our bodies. And then when we come out and we transition to air from an umbilical cord, the same anchor point is where our diaphragm connects. And so that same anchorage starts to pull down, and we get this big expansion, and a knock-on wave happens that creates blood flow and lymphatic return through everything. So it's just this byproduct of breathing, is this magical orchestra that keeps everything moving, like the river systems in the world. So there's any stagnation becomes a problem. So what we do when we breastfeed is, if that's the top of the mouth, the nipple comes in here and we get this nice massaging action, and that actually lifts that palate and spreads that. So we get an opening of this sinus and we get a lifting of the frontal. So we actually start to lift the entire body up through that feeding mechanism. And then when we move to solids, say, like, mostly around 6 months, currently a lot of people will use a lot of mashed food, but if we start focusing on actually engaging that mastication process, then we start to create a strengthening in the jaw and a widening of the jaw and a widening of the palate. And that essentially just sets up our nervous system for future health. So from, like, that's kind of one little simple example I see. It also changes how we breathe as far as the depth and rate. Like, most of the people that I see in practice, if I count their respiratory rate, it sits somewhere between 2 and 3 seconds for an inhale and the same for an exhale. Does anyone have an idea of what would be a good rate? 7, 6, yeah, 5, yeah. 5.5 is what I've heard as but I mean, there's probably a little bit of a fluctuating science, but it's definitely not 2 or 3. So where was I up to? Yeah, so we're constantly learning about these disease states rather than ease states. And then that determines where we're currently investing our energy. So currently we invest, in this previous example, we invest a lot of energy in, say, serotonin uptake inhibitors or antidepressants, because it's a massive industry. We could be focusing on a bunch of substances that have been around for thousands of years, that multiple people around the world in multiple tribal situations have been using, that foster things like knowledge of yourself, or things that change your microbiome, or things that eradicate parasites, and things that essentially bring joy into your life. Most of those things in Australia are illegal. So it's a little backwards. And the same is, so when I look at that on a macro level, like, let's say if we just jump into farming example, like, why do we have to have a certification for organic food? Shouldn't it be the other way? Like, if you're using a poisonous substance, you should probably have a license for that. If I was to, I'm not big into rules, but if I had to maybe make a couple and delete a few, I'd probably flip that one. Because it's just totally unnecessary. Like, it's actually a lot more dangerous to use those chemicals. It's a balance between our endocrine systems being of a lower value than profit of certain multinationals. So if we have an imbalance in that, then it's not essentially a system that is symbiotic with us, and it's not symbiotic with the world, because the end game of it is the death of both of those things. It's just a slow death, so it doesn't look as bad to some people. Or I suppose it's just not as present. It's not like a very violent, quick one. And that kind of relates again to the microbes that we host. The way I look at the gut microbiome is have there been any talks on gut microbiome yet? I missed the morning, so yeah. And no doubt it will be covered a little bit again later. The way I look at the microbiome is it's its own world. So if you kind of look at Earth, I would look at that's Earth. And there's a massive amount of diversity in there, billions of different little critters. And they can't live without this host planet, and we can't live without them. So the thing that is the most interesting research of microbiome stuff that stood out to me was there's companies that have done and research that has been done all around the world, and they look at different microbiomes from people in all different parts of the world, from people with no industrial contact to heaps to minimal to altitude to like forest jungles, and they're all quite different. And there are some microbes that carry across all of us, but there are some in healthy people that exist in one part of the world that don't exist here, and vice versa. The one thing that does seem to be correlated is that the length of the microbiome determines health. A longer one is healthier. So more diversity is more health. And you can kind of get them, like the way they map them looks like a barcode. And you have a longer barcode, you're generally probably going to be pretty healthy. And less scannable. So those kind of things, like even that microbe environment changes from us. So all of our internal microbe collection will be changing because we are in the room together. You can be in a room with someone and that changes your microbiome and their microbiome depending on that interaction. I don't actually know the ins and outs of how that happens. I just find it super interesting. And if we look at that from the world perspective, I would consider us as the microbes. So if we look at planet Earth, we have us and lots of other animals and insects and plants, and everything is essentially symbiotic with nature. So those same principles should apply from a micro to a macrocosm. So same as the Earth is probably just a little part of a greater system in the solar system, and that little microbe network supports something bigger, and so on and so forth. But if we look at how we are affecting, like, has anyone heard the analogy of humans being parasites? Yeah. Does anyone believe that? Yeah, you do. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Who thinks parasites? A show of hands. Quick show of hands. Possibly.
I think humans.
Yeah, humans. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. I was curious. Who thinks not? Yeah, and many non-participants. Yeah, like it depends on what day you look at it. Maybe are you feeling optimistic that day or pessimistic? I don't think we are. I think we're symbiotic. I think that we have a role to play both physically and energetically, and I think we wouldn't be here if we weren't to fulfill that role. But that's personal opinion. And it's nice to have lots of diversity in those opinions. Is that a 10-minute warning for 10 to go, or? Wow, that was quick. All right. All right, no, that's okay. Let me burn through. Anyway, so that, like, the osteopathic lens, I suppose, is we look at some of these things and go, well, how can we affect it? And lots of osteopaths will treat the same problem differently and still get a good result, because the way that everything is working is more in that circular motion. So if there's an interruption to it, you can kind of change it in any spot, and if you can improve it, it'll self-regulate itself. And I think that's the same with the earth. Like, one of the things I like about regenerative farming, and I just was having a look on your guys' website, is the diversity, the soil microbe diversity. I wrote this one down because I knew I wouldn't remember this one. You guys have like bumped that up 140% in the last 5-6 years. Yeah, so then what does that, like, what does the potential of that change for all of us? That's really cool. And plant density by 60%. Like, who's heard of osteoporosis? Lack of density. Yeah, we want more of that. Like, all of that stuff is the same as it is within as it is without. I did a little bit of that. We can skip that one. The whole body connection. One of, like, there's a lot of theorizing. You can theorize a lot about the whole body connection and the different depths of ins and outs of that. One of my favorite ways to do that is through psychedelics. So that's a lot of those substances that are illegal. Some of them are psychoactive, some of them are not. Most of them change your gut microbiome for the positive. And what I love about it, like, there's so many of them that do so many different things. And like, one example that I know a lot of people use is a combination of lion's mane, which you guys grow, which is not psychoactive and is legal in Australia. But the combination of this with a psilocybin mushroom, which is one of the illegal ones, and some B vitamins, I think niacin, that creates this neurogenesis of pathways whilst also lighting up all these anastomotic pathways. So think of it like a road network, is you're building new roads, but you're also using all the back roads. So you increase your bandwidth of communication within yourself, which is like super fun for starters and really good for you. And if it's good for one of us, it's good for all of us, because I find in my observations, whenever someone does something good for themselves, they're not then like, oh, I'm going to be a real dick to that person next to me. Like, it's a knock-on effect. It's kind of like if you put a drop of something in water, you see it spread out. So there's some of the plants that I know of that are available. Like, did anyone know there's a plant that you can cure a heroin addiction in a week? Pretty cool. Like, physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually. It's not like something that you probably want to do for a leisurely activity, but it is very effective. There's that other one I just spoke about that does the increased brain connections. There's other ones that like, all of the trees around us have this particular compound in it that we release in our dream state. And it's particularly high in acacia trees, which are like the most native tree to Australia. That particular compound can, when you flood your brain with it, can send you into a dream state where you can essentially communicate with your soul or your spirit and other ones. And so you can start working from the outside in and the inside out. All of these things are things that I hope we kind of start to loosen some legalities on. Like, obviously I can't recommend any of those, and also for everyone's individual, something that's good for me is not necessarily something that's good for everyone else. So everyone's individual journey has to be taken into account for that. What I want to highlight is there's so much out there that's really great, and we should start either ignoring the rules or loosening them a bit. So yeah, I've got a couple of options. Like, that is, does anyone want to see an osteopathic example of looking at a body, and we'll tie that in together? Yeah? Yeah. Does anyone have a body they can lend me? Yeah. Yep. And my favourite tool. What's your name?
Hugo.
Michael.
Hello, Michael.
All right. Have you got anything troubling you in particular?
Well, I've got beehives at home and one of them isn't doing too well.
Yeah, okay. Do you know what's happening with it?
Yes, it doesn't have enough honey
Okay.
for the winter.
Okay, so what do the bees do about that?
Well, they would go out and gather more, or they would rob, which would not be good because that can transfer diseases between hives.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. So are you feeling that problem the same in your body? Is that, or we just want to talk about, you just want to talk about the bees?
No, although I do like bees.
Yeah.
No. It does worry me, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that one's going to be a hard one for me to give a physical example of, but can I go back to the breathing example with your body? Yeah, are you comfortable with your jacket off? Yeah. So some of the things that I talked about, that breathing becomes something that makes you healthy. It can also degenerate things if it's not happening correctly. So could you stand side on to the crowd? Yeah. And just look straight ahead, breathe normally. If we have a look at this, from an osteopathic perspective, we'd look at this rounding forward, compressing through here. So what's actually happening with Hugo is that her rib cage is being compressed by just mostly maintained by a few muscles. Have you had any injuries or accidents over your life? Major ones?
Not really.
No. Take any medications?
No.
Excellent. Yeah. Did you want me to treat you so I can show people a quick snippet of what we would do? Yeah? Yeah, it's all right. So you can sit there, face that way. So the diaphragm is like a big trampoline going through here. So if we look at the diaphragm like that, and the whole rib cage is being compressed down, if we can release that diaphragm and lift up through that thoracics, then instantly every breath becomes more of a lift and expansion. I don't know if this is going to help you bees, but I've seen crazier things, so. All right. So this gets a little bit uncomfortable just as I get under your rib cage. Just lean back into the chair. That's it. So all I'm doing is sending my fingers up and I'm following the response to those tissues. 5's easy, thanks Brian. And as this body relaxes, it softens and I can at the moment we're just working on the exhale. So we want to get a little bit more out so that we can get a bit more in. Just let your shoulders slump. Yeah, that's good. And I get you to take a breath in and breath out. Let your shoulders relax. I'm going to wave this arm around. Breath in, keep coming in, breath out, shoulders relax. Breath in, right to the top, right to the top, right to the top, breath out, slump. Just drop right down there. Big breath in, lift right up, chest up, lift up, lift up, lift up. Good, out, relax. Have you had your back adjusted before?
Yes.
Yeah. You respond okay to that in the past?
For a day or so, but
then it tightens up again? Yeah. Yeah. Can you spin around on the chair so you're straddling it?
Yeah.
I might actually, no, I'm a lot taller than you. You'll have to stand up.
I'm a lot shorter than most people.
And so, all I'm really doing here is can you put your hands up behind your neck and interlock your fingers? I'm going to lift you quite quickly. You'll hear a little noise in your back. Just pop your elbows forward, shoulders relax. Take a breath in and breath out. Joy. All right, sit back down there. All I'm really doing is creating a fulcrum to lever off, like a seesaw. All right, so take a big breath in and then breath out, let your shoulders relax. Next breath in, can you look up to the roof? Breath in, look up, lift up, look up, look up, look up, look up, and breath out, head down, shoulders relax. Breath in, look up, lift up, higher, higher. Yeah, good, and let it go. All right, now you can stand up. Just look eye level at me. Yeah, excellent. So instantly we can see that there's a whole nother curve. And if you just take a big breath in, feel that little bit of space that you weren't getting before. So the beauty of this is that will carry on for however long you remember to breathe fully. And it doesn't have to be every single breath, because we get distracted and it's a constant relearning of things. But what that does to a nervous system over a period in time is amazing, because you can start to bring it back into parasympathetic, which is our rest, digest, repair. And if we can get those two systems actually moving like a seesaw, it's a really good life to enjoy.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, I hope that helps you. Thanks for being the guest. Yeah, so today, for the rest of today, my challenge is people come to me with problems and I have to balance a line between solving a problem and also not focusing on problems. And it's really tricky to do. So I sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. My challenge, that's kind of like my daily challenge. My challenge for the rest of today would be to look at the information that's being presented for the rest of the day and have a think about how it relates from a micro to a macrocosm. Like, how does it affect you internally, and how does it affect the people that you know and the people that they know, and so on and so forth. Just because it's a fun thing to do. But thanks for having me. That's about time, I think. Yeah.